2024 Policy and Government Relations Committee meeting of the School District of Waukesha Board of Education. I call tonight's meeting to order. Julie, can you please verify the meeting has been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is opportunity for public comment. Do we have any speakers tonight?
We do not.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we can move into our first action item of the evening, which is approval of the minutes from our last meeting, which was on, I believe, June 10th.
I so move.
Thank you.
Second it.
Moved by Mrs. Voigt, seconded by Mr. Borowski. Any discussion? All right, all in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, passes 4-0. All right, first policy item tonight is policy number 0152, related to officers. Dr. Siebert.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wad, and good evening, everyone. So, in this particular policy, this is a Neola update in our last update, and it's revised to designate an administrator/administrative assistant that assume current responsibilities for the clerk, who in this case is Mr. Wad. So, it starts out, we added the reference to 120.43 because that is where ultimately the board elects, in the first sentence, the president, vice president, treasurer, and clerk. And then it also references that the board shall elect a board secretary who may not be a member of the board. In our case, that's Sue, who fulfills that duty. And that'll occur within 30 days of the fourth Monday in April, which is our reorganizational meeting when, for example, this year, Mr. Brooks began his tenure. And so we added a statement in there that it is the preference of the board that the board secretary is not a board member, based on Mr. Wad and my conversation, so that we maintain that it is Sue or the equivalent of Sue in that position, which, as that serves multiple purposes for us from an elections perspective as well as many others. And then we made that further clearer because Mr. Wad and I had a lot of good conversation around board clerk versus district clerk versus board secretary versus secretary. Like, some of these terms, even in state statute, can be relatively confusing. So we tried to make that a little bit more clear. And then also in D, said designate an administrator, so administrator, which was already there, / administrative assistant, to assume specified responsibilities of the board treasurer and the board clerk. So Mr. Clark fulfills some of the roles of the board treasurer in terms of getting the things ready, for example, for the treasurer or for Mr. Wad as the clerk to sign. And then Sue, accordingly, based on some of the other things I've mentioned, does some additional pieces that help the board clerk. So we think Mr. Wad and I played with this a little bit. We're happy to answer any of the committee's questions, but we think we got it to a place after quite a bit of discussion that where we feel like it makes sense.
Mrs. White.
I think it's a good idea to spell out the fact that it's the preference of the board to have the board secretary not be a board member, because that's a huge job.
Yep.
That she does such an amazing job at taking care of for us.
Mr. Brooks.
Yeah, I'm glad that we were able to parse this out, and I agree. I think it's important that we have a board secretary who's overseeing, that it's not a board member who's overseeing things like the elections process. Just a point of clarification. So in the first paragraph, the highlighted portion says it is the preference of the board that the board secretary is not a board member. That's what we're adding. But the prior sentence says the board shall also elect a board secretary who may not be a member of the board, or two sentences before it, I should say. So it is the preference of overriding, because the other statement, may not be a member of the board, feels very definitive and they should not be a member of the board, whereas it is the preference, perhaps, is more open to interpretation.
It's a good point, Mr. Brooks. So the part you're referencing in the first sentence is directly from the state statute. So that's why we left it who may not be a member of the board. we wanted to put something in that it's the preference of the board. So a future board could change that if they wanted, that it could be a board member. But if there's a different way to say, because you make a good point, we could certainly think about that.
So I think, and I remember having this exact conversation with Dr. Siebert because of the statutory language. So may provides option, right? If you read that the way it's intended, what they're saying is if you want to, as a board, not have your secretary be a member of the board, or a elected board member, you're allowed to do that. And then, and I think what we wanted to do then was to further clarify that, at least at the time of this policy writing, the preference is that it isn't an elected member of the board, but rather someone who isn't. So I agree that that language is challenging from the statutes, but the intention here is to kind of marry those two things between what the legislature allows us to choose to do and what our preference is. Any other discussion or comments on policy 0152, officers? All right, I'd be looking for a motion to adopt as presented. Mrs. Voigt.
I move to approve policy 0152 on officers as presented.
Thank you.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Brooks, moved by Mrs. Voigt. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right. 0152 passes 4-0. Next tonight, we have a related policy, 0171.3, clerk.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Mr. Wad. So as Mr. Wad said, this is relatively closely tied to the one we just approved and to 0100 definitions that we approved, I want to say, maybe in June or May. I can't remember. There was some references there too. The update here is that the clerk is responsible for the following duties, which are A through G, where we added in, which may be completed with the assistance of appropriate staff or designee. We added the part that says primarily the board secretary pursuant to policy 0152 officers, which you just approved. So we're referencing back who that role of the board secretary, who in our case is Sue. In E, it gets to that point of her being the chief election officer of the district, which she does an amazing job with. And that she is also the one that appoints the qualified electors of the district to serve on the board of canvassers. So there's always 3 individuals, including her, come up here in the boardroom, they announce when they're going to do it, and then they do the election canvass after the election goes forward, and they get all the books from all of our municipalities, and then they go through and count all those votes. So then it just referencing state statute 7.53, which is in the election category, referencing the Board of Canvassers. And we left in 120.43, which is the one we put in the last policy too, which just talks about the fact that the board elects these individuals at their reorganizational meeting. So this was another one that Mr. Wad and I played with for a month or two, and Julie, and think we got it to a better place. So that's the beauty of this committee. I really enjoy working with you on it, because I think while you see School District of Waukesha edits on the bottom of them, many of them, it's okay, because we're making these policies fit what we need here in the School District of Waukesha, which is the most important thing, and that you feel good about them as a board.
So before I open it up for discussion, I just want to call something out, and I'm maybe offering a friendly editorial amendment. So one of the things that when we were having these discussions about the previous policy and this one was differentiating the board clerk from the clerk of the board, right? So I do, first of all, want to point out that language at the beginning, the clerk of the Board of Education represents the administrative role within the school district, not as a member of the board, but someone who does administration on behalf of the district impacting the board, right? Through all these items, including the election administration. I'm wondering if we might want to just change the title from clerk to clerk of the board. I don't know if that will lend clarity or create more confusion for those who may be trying to understand the role and who's responsible for what, and the difference between the administrative function of clerk of the board versus the officer role of board clerk. Mrs. Voigt.
I'm wondering if clerk for the board, because it's really a clerk supporting the board, versus the board clerk is an officer of the board.
Yeah, I guess I'll say I agree with doing some kind of distinction because I was confused on it myself.
Yep.
And I think potentially the clerk for the board might be better.
Anyone have, Mr. Brooks, do you have any thought on it one way or the other?
Yeah, I think it's important to provide some clarity between the two because it can be confusing. Struggling to come up with another alternative, but I think clerk for the board makes some sense.
So I think we all recognize that as a friendly amendment if we just want to
Sure.
amend that in place.
Yep.
So just
Do you
to,
see any potential issues with that, Dr. Siebert?
No.
Go ahead, Mr. Plonsky.
just to clarify then, we want to make that distinction in the title
And I think in the paragraph too.
and then in the, I guess, what would that be, the top of the paragraph or the title of that paragraph
Yeah.
too?
And probably that very first sentence where we say the clerk of the board, we would want to change to
Yeah.
clerk of the board.
Clerk for, okay. So it's in the title of the policy, it's in the title of that paragraph, and then anywhere it's stated
Yeah.
within the policy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone agree? Mr. Brooks?
Just throwing this out there as a alternate language. I don't have a preference one way or another, but what about district clerk versus board clerk? District clerk being the official role that we would give to Sue, board clerk being whoever is the elected officer.
So, quick question, Dr. Siebert. Are there other roles within the school district that we refer to as clerks that have really no intersection with the board?
Are you thinking of any, Julie? I'm not. No, I'm not thinking of any off the top of my head.
Because I think just for making it easier for us and for members of the public, I think having the word board in both of them can be still tricky. So I think trying to be able to delineate between the two of them can be helpful.
Yeah.
I'm okay
Good
with
point.
that.
Yeah.
As long as that doesn't create any confusion with any of the roles elsewhere within the district. And it sounds like, yeah, Mrs. White,
I like how it fits with E, where you're talking about the chief election officer of the district.
yeah.
Then let's speak to it as the district clerk. I
Yeah.
think that's a really good call.
Yeah. That's a slight improvement of what you had mentioned, Ms. Voigt. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I think we should adopt that if everyone's okay with it.
Yeah. Okay. So district clerk, wherever there is clerk.
Yeah.
So policy title, paragraph title, anywhere in the,
School district, well, how did you phrase it? Was it district?
just
clerk?
said-
district clerk.
I just said district clerk. School district clerk is fine. Doesn't matter to me.
School district clerk is actually used in some statutory language, and
Which
that's where.
refers to the administrative role as opposed to
Well,
the,
that's the challenge. I think in the legislative language, it refers to you. But it's really interesting how these terms get.
right.
Yeah.
But as long as we're clear on what it means for us, I think we're fine.
Do we need to add any language that clarifies that at all? That delineates that this is an administrative role that supports the school district as opposed to the elected clerk officer?
I almost wonder if we cross off where we added as a suggestion, primarily the board secretary down here, and we say the district clerk for the Board of Education, comma, slash, also,
Wait, where is this? I'm sorry, where is this?
First sentence.
maybe in the first sentence, so we could say something to the extent of the district clerk for the Board of Education, comma, generally the board secretary, comma, is responsible for the following duties which may be completed with the assistance of appropriate staff or designee pursuant to Board Policy 0152, because it is one person in the same.
Yep.
So maybe it reads cleaner that way, and if you get it out in the beginning,
Front load.
Sure.
front load, Mrs.
Well-
White, there you go.
And let me just mention something else. I think there's been other policies where there's definitions at the end of the policy. Is there not? Definitions of terms or something? I thought I've seen that before.
Maybe, in some, there could
So
be.
I don't know if that's a place to do it too. I mean, I do like your suggestion of putting it right up front.
So I will share my biggest concern about making sure that we're very clear about the delineation of roles is so that we never find ourselves in a situation where somebody who has been elected the board clerk could usurp the role of becoming an election administrator.
Yeah,
To me, that would be inappropriate. So,
Yeah.
so long as we don't put ourselves in a situation where someone could make the pretzel logic argument that the clerk roles that we're describing now have nothing to do and are clearly delineated from the responsibility of the officer who is elected by the board to be clerk, I'm fine with it. The language is definitely a struggle because of the shared terminology, but
I think this is cleaner.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
so,
those
so-
are the Dr. Seaver just made.
so the name of the policy would still be clerk for the Board of Education. Is that what I heard?
I think we still like school district.
School district clerk?
District clerk.
District clerk.
District clerk or
Or
Clerk.
district clerk, school district, however you guys,
I think
Just
district clerk.
or district clerk for the Board of Education? Or you tell us.
I would leave Board of Education out of the title.
Leave it out of the title.
Yeah.
So just district clerk, okay. And then the first sentence could potentially read, the district clerk for the Board of Education, comma, also known as the board secretary, comma, is responsible for the following duties, blah, blah, blah.
Okay, so now I'm gonna potentially walk us into another
Well,
potential issue, though. So
Yep,
we have that language that says our preference is for the secretary not to be elected, an elected member of the board. You have a future, and I suppose you could say this about any policy, they could change any policy. But if a board member were, the board decided they wanted to elect one of the elected members to be the board secretary, do they then inherit this role of being an election clerk? Because that's where we really, I think, want to make sure we're drawing a clear distinction that that role is an administrative role that lies outside of any of the officers of the board.
yes. I see what you mean. I mean, we could do what Mr. Borowski is suggesting and just say the district clerk for the Board of Education is responsible, blah, 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 pursuant to that. And then on the bottom, do a definition of the district clerk.
And maybe spell out clearly that it's,
Yeah, and the district clerk is generally also known as the board secretary, and pursuant to policy 0152, it is the, whatever words we used,
do we,
reference of the board that the board secretary is not a board member.
do we think maybe we want to wait another month just to make sure we've?
I think so.
Yeah.
I would, yeah.
back?
And, because one other question here, and this seems silly, but in the first paragraph, aren't we saying that the assistance of a staff or designee, primarily the board secretary, so it ends up being the same person in our district?
Yes, so that's why we crossed.
Oh, we did. I didn't catch that part.
No, I think because you're exactly right. That should be up farther. That shouldn't be, that's not a
Okay.
different person, that's the same person.
All right, because that's
Yes.
adding even more confusion. So yeah, I would say let's see it in writing.
Yeah, we'll bring it back.
Changes.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Yeah. No, it's good discussion. You can see why Mr. Watt and I have been, and Julie have been working on these for a few months. We're trying to get this
Sound
straight.
like an Abbott and Costello routine.
Yes,
First,
Who's the clerk? I don't know.
Yes.
They're the secretary.
exactly. Okay, we'll bring that back with some clarity.
All right, thank you.
Hopefully.
Dr. Siebert?
No guarantees, but we'll do our best.
All right, hopefully to one where the language is a little bit less confusing. Policy 8431, preparedness for toxic hazards.
All right, so I'm fortunate to have Mr. Kyle McCarthy with us this evening, I should say. And he'll come up to the table to join us. And what this policy is doing is it's authorizing the superintendent to designate two required job titles in the district. One is the Toxic Hazard Preparedness Officer, or the THPO. That is Kyle. You're looking at him himself. And then the other position is the Chemical Hygiene Officer, which is Erica Yoss, who is a frequent visitor at the Teaching and Learning Committee. And then Kyle also works with her when we do, and he can explain how we go about that in terms of maintaining the chemicals that are used across the district and in science classrooms across the secondary schools. And then it also regards the application of chemical pesticides on district property, which Kyle can explain to you too. That can be a little bit technical at times. But basically, it's just, this policy is updating terminology and the fact that those are two different individual people. And we basically then work, also Kyle can talk about the company EMC that we work with that helps us put together all of our emergency preparedness plans and make sure that we're on the right page. So we can basically start with questions and see what questions you have, and Kyle will be happy to help. Thanks for being here, Kyle.
So Dr. Siebert, I guess I'll just ask a question I often ask when we see changes like this. What's driving these particular changes, which don't appear to substantially change the way we operate or who the people are that are appointed, but the wording, is it just to better reflect the way we operate, or is there statutory reasons?
Yeah, there's two new statutory references in there, 94-705 and 94-715. So those are around the Wisconsin Department of Health Services and updates that they made to those statutes. So that's where I think these changes come from.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Concerns?
Kyle is a
Kyle?
wealth of information. If you just even want to hear him tell you things
Anything we
about
should
it.
be asking that we're not?
That's a good question to ask Kyle. What should we know that we don't?
Well, like Dr. Siebert said, it's really just a new title. It's just something that we've always been doing. We work closely with the science department, and once a year we walk through with EMC to each science lab and just basically do a walkthrough of chemicals, chemical storage, just different things like that. Just take some recommendations from them. Then also once a year, before the students come back, we call it a clean sweep. So we have we pick different schools based on the science curriculum that they did during the year, and so we'll clean out some of those old chemicals. Basically, we get them to the hood, and then EMC comes in, and we call it a clean sweep. They'll take out all those hazardous chemicals that they're not going to be used, not labeled, stuff like that. So it's really expensive. So we try to, maximize as much as we can. But at least once a year, we have a company come in and just remove a lot of those hazardous chemicals that aren't labeled, aren't being used, that were identified during like a walkthrough. So it's something that we've always done and we do a good job at. I think it's just adding the title at this point.
Mr. Brooks?
Thank you. Just one quick question. Is there a reason for removing the portion about notifying staff members? Is it just that that's already done and putting it in procedure was kind of redundant? Or I guess what's the process going forward? And is it necessary in your opinion that they need to put out a notice to all staff members that this is happening?
Yep. I'm not sure on that side of it, on the educational side, but like take asbestos for example, like that's posted on the district website. So I mean that's something that we could always do if you guys wanted.
I think, Mr. Brooks, it's just replacing it, it's instead of saying 1, 2, 3, 4, saying it's certified in accordance with state law, and in the event of pesticide application, notice of such application shall be posted by the individual who applies the pesticides in accordance with state law. So it's still happening, it's just not listing out exactly.
Just complying with what's
What
already
it
in
is,
statute.
yes.
Makes sense.
And so just to elaborate a little more on that, I want to say we have 6 district employees that can spray pesticides. And basically, they just follow the same rules, they post a difference. And then if they're going to be around the elementary, there's different times they can do it and when they can't do it. So they follow that. Everything's documented on a daily basis. So if they were spraying somewhere, that comes in, hey, we sprayed at this school today, and we're notified pretty much right away if there's any questions or if anybody's in the area or if anybody walking through, hey, did you guys spray over and at this school today? Yep, we did. So that's all documented on a daily basis.
So my interpretation of this was, we're looking at F, right? That's the verbiage that you were looking at?
Yes.
Okay. That requiring that any individual and replacing staff member with individual would assume that there could be somebody that we contract with, which isn't a staff member, who may be here applying those things and ensuring that they're properly certified. Is that right?
Yep.
Correct. One of the things I think we should be very proud of when it comes to our maintenance and custodial department is how much we can do ourselves. Like this building, for example, Whittier, I mean, so much of this is done by Kyle, Chad, and their teams. And so when you have in-house talent like we have in that area at the service building and throughout the school district, we really have the ability to do things at less cost. And there's a tremendous amount of pride in the men and women that do that work. So I didn't even know we had 6 people that could spray pesticides, right? I mean, it's a lot more cost effective for us to do that ourselves than to contract that out. Same with snow removal, lawn service, the list goes on and on.
No, that's a great point, Dr. Siebert, and you're right. I mean, that is a huge benefit to the district and a credit to you and your team.
Appreciate that.
Kyle, we greatly appreciate all the work and expertise
We got a good
you and
team,
your
so.
bring to the district. So, any other comments, questions on the hazardous preparedness for toxic hazards policy changes? All right, I would be looking for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Brooks,
I'll second it.
seconded by Mr. Borowski. Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, passes 4-0. Thank you, Cal, for coming and talking to us. Appreciate it much. All right, next up, so this is policy 7544, social media. We talked about it, I think, back in June.
Yes.
And it's back with some of the revisions and things that we discussed. So,
Right.
Dr. Siebert, I'll let you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Wad. So this is a Neola policy. It's just one we haven't had in the past. What we do have currently is 25 policies that reference social media in total. And this policy, what it attempts to do is bring social media under one roof, if you will. and it references those 25 policies as well, based on our conversation last month of noting at the end of this policy all of the other policies that contain social media. So those have been added based on the committee's suggestion. The other thing we've attempted to do in this policy is delineate between student and staff use, as we talked about last month, or 2 months ago actually, we had July off, using for students 7540.03, student technology acceptable uses and safety, and adding a clause there about student use. And then for staff, using policy 7540, technology, adding a sentence there to try to provide more clarity based on the committee's suggestion. And then the other thing we did in this policy near the end was to reference professional and support staff employee handbooks, which also reference social media and social media policies. So listing that in addition to federal law, board policies, administrative guidelines, or the professional and support staff employee handbooks. So trying to give a more comprehensive look at the overall policy based on the committee's suggestions last time, and I think that's a good summary for starters.
Thank you, Dr. Siebert. Questions?
I have several questions, potential edits,
Sure.
that I'd like to address if we could. First one, I numbered the paragraphs to try to
Go ahead.
make some sense of it. In paragraph 5 on the first page, it references that authorized staff may use district technology resources to assess and use social media to increase awareness of district programs and activities, as well as to promote achievements of staff and students, provided the superintendent approves in advance such access and use. I'm wondering if the need to say that it has to be provided that the superintendent approves in advance needs to be there, because it's referenced again like two other times that the superintendent has to be doing this approval, and like,
Sure.
what does that involve? Like, every time they want to do a social media post, they need to come run to you and ask if it's okay.
Well,
It's like-
sure, it's a good
As far as the
question.
job description, it's like, whoa, that just seems really heavy on having to run to you to ask the question.
Sure. So that is cut and pasted directly out of 7540, which is actually next on our agenda for consideration, some updates. Whenever superintendent is capitalized, that means superintendent or designee. So in this particular case, that's a school level responsibility where it's at the school level where the principal would be approving or the athletic director, for example, the athletic team Twitter account or whatever it might be, right? So the goal is to definitely be using it to promote all of the great things that we're doing in terms of programmatic activities and academic activities, but to ensure that somebody at the school level knows what's going on. The way that Neola does that is that they use superintendent capitalized to refer to the designee. Now, that doesn't mean we couldn't change that, right? Or take it out, or say it's school level approval by the administrator. There's different ways to do it, certainly. We just have to remember that and then change it in 7540 as well, because that's where we pulled it from.
Would it make sense to say superintendent or designee?
In some Neola policies, it does do that, so that we could certainly do that.
I know that we've referenced this capital superintendent kind of idea in previous policies, but like if somebody's reading this who doesn't have that background, it just looks like, boy, that superintendent's really busy having to look at social media.
Yeah, we could say or superintendent or designee. if
Because
that
in
was-
one place,
board
they
was
do
comfortable with
reference
that.
the principal as being the person that's doing it. You know, they actually, with this putting together all these different references under one roof kind of thing.
Sure.
Yeah, I guess,
Mr.
go ahead,
Rose.
I'm sorry.
And correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like it was an eternity ago when we were first discussing this, but I believe when we first brought this up, because I know this was a concern of ours last time, was that, being able to distinguish, okay, is it okay if a teacher uses this to promote, classroom achievements or athletic achievements, what have you. I think we discussed that it wasn't like every single time you posted. It was kind of a one-time start of the year, sign off, and then you're good for the year on that.
Absolutely correct. Yep.
Yeah, Mr. Russell.
Well, I was just going to say, back to the superintendent or designee, I'm just wondering if we should be consistent on that, though. Because if we say it, and I'm not sure if it is anywhere else, I didn't notice it, but if we say it in one paragraph and don't say it later, but mean it later, that could add confusion. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
It could. It's a fair point.
I don't know.
I think it references it, paragraph 5, paragraph 7 are the two that,
Is that the only two? Okay.
those are the two that jumped out at me, and then another time it's referenced as the principal doing it, and, et cetera. So just,
Okay, and then just for clarification, Dr. Seaver, where is that indicated in some other policy, or that anytime superintendent is in capitalized, that it means that or designee?
Oh, I don't, is it, Julie?
It's
In definitions.
Definitions.
That was
0100.
We had it in definitions, yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
okay,
I
so.
thought we had tackled that at some point, but I couldn't remember if it was in that definitions discussion or something.
Okay, so indicating it there's, I guess, are you saying that suffices rather than having it at the end of this policy to explain that? I mean, I'm not suggesting we put it there, I'm just saying, if in definitions, that kind of handles all the policies and that should suffice, then maybe we just leave it there and,
And 0100 actually is listed at the end of this because it also does have a definition of social media.
oh,
in the
okay.
Definition, in the definitions policy. So I understand where Mrs. Voigt is coming from. I understand where you're coming from too, of not wanting to necessarily have to change all of our policies to say superintendent or designee. So, I mean, it's whatever the committee would like.
So I tend to look at stuff like this. If we don't clarify it, what would be the impact of not identifying the and designee? It might be that somebody were to call Dr. Siebert one day and say, hey, I'd like use of whatever account, and Dr. Siebert would say, well, actually, that's a building level or a school level. Why don't you talk to the principal or the athletic director? And
Correct.
I don't know that it would lead us into a bad place to not have it clearly identified in this policy. And if we've got definitions and anyone ever questions it, we can always refer them back to 100, right? So I kind of like the idea of if we have it defined somewhere, that's how we use it everywhere. And it makes the maintenance of policy, I think, cleaner, but
I'm okay with that too, actually.
anyone else have any thoughts on that particular? And Mrs. Voigt, what are your thoughts?
I was it was just more of a, as I'm reading this.
Sure.
Like, it just seemed like it was a little S superintendent, because I would think,
Yes.
It's kind of, it's an unusual definition process. that
Sure.
I understand
Yep.
what it means. So I'm okay either way. If you
Okay.
don't want to
Okay.
change it, it's just an understanding, I guess, that I didn't want it to have to be part of your job description over
No,
and over. and
that's
over.
fair. Thank you.
Yes,
Then I
Mrs.
have
Voigt.
another
Okay,
thing
go ahead.
like that. I think it's really important to clarify that we're talking about district-approved social media. And in a lot of cases, we don't necessarily add the district-approved piece to the some of the wording, like in paragraph 7, again. It talks about the superintendent shall maintain the district's social media presence. So that, again, is the district-approved social media presence.
Yes, which is referenced in paragraph 3, but you'd be suggesting we do that again in paragraph 7.
Right.
That'd be fine.
Like I said, but just by adding the word approved, it's identifying we're only talking about these that are under the umbrella of being sponsored by, being promoted by the district itself. And like that same kind of terminology would be in, again, in paragraph 8, the use of social media, staff, including district-approved volunteers, et cetera, there from the principal, use district-approved social media platforms.
Yeah, because then down in the next sentence, it does use district-approved social media.
Right.
So you're just saying be consistent with
To be
district-approved.
consistent, that you realize it's not just any social media
So-
out there, but that it's district-approved is what this policy is all about.
I think that's
Yeah.
fair.
it might be like very repetitious, but I think that that's really significant, that that's the one, what we're talking about. And then like paragraph 14, I think, is another one.
Well, what about, let me ask you this, what about just having it in the title of the policy? Use of district-approved social media, and then we know that that's what the policy is about. Can we change it there?
Well, we do get into the use of personal social
Oh, you're
media
right.
later in the
Okay,
policy
yep.
too.
And that's the reason,
Yeah.
Gotcha, yep.
So I think that's, but I appreciate the suggestion, Mr.
You're right, yeah, I was overlooking that. Thank you.
If the committee would like that, we can put district-approved social media anywhere it says social media,
you just find and replace.
with the
except for
exception of the
very
personal
end.
part
Right.
Yeah.
at the end.
I'm okay with that. Anyone?
Sure.
have a-
Okay,
That sounds good.
suggestion.
Mrs. White?
Paragraph 9, which is right before the heading expected standards on page 2.
Okay.
Employees are prohibited from using personal social media accounts to communicate or otherwise connect or interact with students for any purpose that's not related to instructional or school-sponsored activities. I'm wondering if there's any exceptions to that if it's a family member. This seems so absolute, like you will not have any social media connections with any students. And, would there be a reasonable expectation if it's a parent, if it's a, grandparent, whatever, in that context? Should we list some reasonable, exclusions, exceptions to that rule?
I see what you mean. There might be a way to do that. I mean, we could,
Like a familial connection or,
Well, yeah. Mr. Brooks, I think you had a comment.
So I guess how I read that, and I think that's a fair point. Do we want to sit here and think of every single exception that we can write out? I think for me, especially when it comes to the family thing, I view how it's written as employees are prohibited from using personal social media accounts to communicate with students.
Yep.
If a family member is communicating with another family member on social media, I don't view that as them communicating in their role as an employee of the school district of Waukesha. I view it as their communication as a mom, a grandpa, sibling or cousin or whatever the connection is there. And I don't think, I feel like most, that wasn't an exception that came to mind. I think it's a fair one to point out, as I said, but I don't think a lot of people would have objections to, if a mom is teaching in the district and she has a son at, she's a middle school teacher and has a son at the elementary school communicating over social media. I don't think people would view that as like an inappropriate relationship online between family members.
Yeah,
again, I'm reading it, taking it literally.
I understand, and it is a fair point. I guess, again, I come back to this and think, okay, what's the worst thing that would happen as a result of leaving the wording as it is? I can't imagine any scenario where someone administering this policy would ever look at the communication between a staff member and their child who also happens to be a student as being some sort of a violation unless what was being communicated. And I can't even imagine what that scenario would be, right? So I'd like to believe that while it isn't explicitly stated, that the interpretation of that there would be an inherent understanding that the communication, what we're referring to is communication between non-related adults and that work in the district and students who may be students here. Mr. Brooks?
Yeah, I think that's well said. Again, the purpose, at least in my interpretation and reading this, for this portion of the policy is essentially just to lay out guidelines and try to avoid scenarios where there's inappropriate contact between staff members and students in the district for non-educational purposes. We've seen,
Or the
you know,
potential.
or the potential.
Interpretation of it being inappropriate, even if it's not.
Yeah, right. It's a policy that's meant to protect students, but it's also a policy that's meant to protect staff members from even putting themselves in that situation where something could be misinterpreted that way. And so I can certainly appreciate reading things literally, because in government, that's kind of what you have to do is look at things analytically. But I don't think people would view those associations being as from the perspective of an employee of the district. I think they would view it as a perspective of a family member.
I think the best analogy I can draw here is a coach who is taking one of their players home without anyone else being present could potentially lead someone to draw conclusions that are fair or unfair. So like when I was coaching, if a student needed a ride home, I always made sure another coach rode with me, right? So there were 2 adults in the vehicle. At the same time, no one would have batted an eye to me giving my son a ride home after practice, right? So I would hope that that would be the way this would be interpreted, and that there wouldn't be anyone who would seek to discipline someone if they were communicating with their own child. And I would think that if that ever happened, the board would probably be invited to get involved, so, if it got to that point. So I'm okay with the language as is, although I do understand the literal reading of it now that, might be potentially misunderstood.
And then I have one more.
Go ahead, Mrs. White.
Okay. At the top of the 3rd page, employees and district-approved volunteers are prohibited from using district technology resources as defined in bylaw 0100 definitions to access social media for personal use. I happen to have been around as a teacher when they rolled out the computers. And at that point, one of the things that was said by the tech team was that you can use these district devices for anything that doesn't rhyme with corn. Okay? So the notion of not being able to use it for, that you have to have your own personal computer to be able to do anything with social media, et cetera. You can't use the school computer that you have with you and you're taking home to do your paper correcting, et cetera. You need to go to your own home computer now to be able to go onto social media is, I guess, has not been practiced for a long time.
Okay.
And my concern would be if we make this a policy, we'd have to be doing some friendly reminders that that's the intent of this, is that you're not using the school computer for anything like that, because that's not past practice from my experience.
And you're referring to the personal use aspect of that, Mrs. White?
Exactly.
Sure.
It's like, do you need to buy another computer to take home to do, everything? It's like, no, this computer can do everything as long as it doesn't, rhyme with horn,
There are choices. So, for example, in the next paragraph, it says employees are permitted to use personal communication devices to access social media for personal use during breaks and meal times. The thought being, a lot of people do that on their phone.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So it's not that they can't do it during school, it's just saying the district, in the way it's currently written, the district technology resources shouldn't be used for personal use on social media during your work time. But it does say that you can use your personal communication devices during breaks and meal times if you want to check your social media that way. Now, it can be changed, certainly, to say that they can.
Well, and just another reality check of that is that Facebook is blocked on the public Wi-Fi. So you'd have to be sure you have a telephone, and I used to not have a phone that worked within the confines of North High School, the solid walls of North High School, that literally I'd have to go to the doors to be able to use my cell phone, to be able to do anything. Where, again, just practicality of it, that yes, if your cell phone works, that's fine, but there's no guarantee that you're going to have a device that does in some of our buildings.
That's true, yeah. Schools aren't the greatest for reception.
No.
It's true. I think it's the flat roofs that are full of rocks,
Is that
generally
part of it?
speaking, yeah.
Okay. So I'm just saying, the reality of it, we might be we have to let teachers know because of the reality of that circumstance. This has been violated, past practice has not been this interpretation of this policy. And for legitimate reasons. It's not like we're trying to be bad,
Sure, sure.
So you're saying because you can't use your personal device, people are using the district device?
And you go to public Wi-Fi, to try to connect, it's banned. Facebook's blocked on public Wi-Fi, so.
So, let me just. So this is saying that no device issued by the district or belonging to the district can be used at any time, anywhere for accessing social media for personal use.
That's what it currently says.
Okay,
It currently says.
so I'm just trying to envision, other than just convenience, what would be the urgency or the necessity for somebody to access. Now, we're not talking about being able to make a phone call or even accessing personal email, right? Is personal email considered social media by definition? It isn't, right?
I wouldn't think so.
So I'm trying to imagine what the urgency or necessity would be for somebody to access social media on a district device, especially knowing some of the pitfalls of social media that you can fall into without even knowing, right? And I remember there being quite a discussion publicly about what people were able to access on Twitter when that was not properly blocked off from students, right? I've accidentally walked my way into things on Twitter that I never intended to. And so from just a safety perspective, again, this almost protects the employees too, I think. If we say you really shouldn't be using a district device for accessing social media, I can't imagine an urgency that is so important that would create a hardship for the employee. We all have other devices, whether it's our phone, iPads, laptops, whatever, to access our personal social media platform or social media sites. So I'm inclined to want to leave it as it's stated.
Well, and just to clarify, this is just social media, so it's not like they can't go on their iPad to check the news, right? Or
Right.
something the weather, something that you would sort of do in the course of a day. Okay, so I mean that helps. Understanding that, I guess.
Mr. Brooks.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with Mr. Watt. When I was going through the packet this week, I kind of appreciated the humor of having social media listed right after toxic hazards, because I think oftentimes they're one and the same. But yeah, to me this feels like just it's a way to protect staff members from putting themselves in a situation where they're even presented with this issue. And then also I think it's just kind of differing between personal devices and district approved devices. And, do the taxpayers of this district really want teachers and staff scrolling Twitter and Facebook on district approved devices during the workday? I don't know how many people are really thinking about that, but, that's something where I think you're just better off, during break times, during those off times, using your own personal devices. That's still allowed. It's just to be able to decipher between the two. And again, this is for using district approved devices for personal use. So if you're using them for an academic purpose, if you need to access social media for some reason for an academic purpose, maybe you're showing your class a video that you found on Facebook or on Twitter, it's, that would be allowed under this reading of the policy, at least from how I interpreted it.
Yep.
Ms. White?
This also talks about district-approved volunteers. So my concern would be we pass this policy, say we're going to have it be approved on Wednesday night. That doesn't give the people out there a lot of chance to be able to be aware that, that this is a policy that is in place. My concern would be that this is something that really impacts a lot of people's potential use of their computers. And, it'd be something that we should probably wait and have, be published at a time when people are going to be aware of it happening. In September or October, when people are back and, aware of things that are going on, not like sneak it through in the middle of summer. This is one of the policies that I totally agree with our, streamlining the policy process for things that are, not as impactful as something like this. This is really a pulling together a policy that's covers a lot of other miscellaneous places. This is really a new policy that's doing that, and I think that needs more than one reading to be able to flesh it out and make sure that any clarifications are made with due diligence. It's on the list to be a policy action item for tonight, and I guess I don't think it's ready for that kind of approval, at this point.
Ms. Brooks?
So who's tasked with enforcing these policies, and I guess what would be the process of if somebody, somebody used social media, a personal use social media on a district-approved device, how would that be addressed? Just trying to picture a scenario here.
Sure. So I will answer that, Mr. Brooks. Just back to Mrs. Voigt's point, whatever the committee chooses to do, if you'd like to wait, that's absolutely fine. If you'd like to move forward with it, or consider moving forward with it, we do have, from Ms. Gunnerman's piece in the last update, a lot of common slide decks that we put together for the principals when we worked with them last week. And this is something that could go in one of those common slide decks so that everybody across the district is seeing the same thing when they come in for in-service in the beginning of the year, and it's very clear and explicit what the highlights of this policy would be. So just for that standpoint, for your understanding. Mr. Brooks, from your perspective, I mean, it's not like it's a violent crime, right? I mean, it's something that the principal is going to talk with the individual about. If it's something that's persistent, it works through a progressive disciplinary scenario like anything else, right, where it might rise to the level of having to involve the Human Resources Department, depending on what employee group it is. But generally speaking, I don't see that it's going to be a pervasive issue for us.
Ms. White?
The last paragraph, or second from the last paragraph at the very end, there's another statement that, again, not only employees but volunteers are part of it. And I'm wondering what it means. It's buried in the middle of that paragraph, so I'm going to read the whole paragraph. Employees and district-approved volunteers are prohibited from posting or engaging in communication that violates state or federal law, board policies, administrative guidelines, or the professional and support staff employee handbooks. And then the next sentence is the one I have a concern about. If an employee volunteers, are we referring to social media communication? Because it just says communication, interferes with their ability to effectively perform their job or violates state and federal law, board policies, or administrative guidelines, the district may impose disciplinary action. This is where you're saying, like, who's the cop for this? About how is this going to be handled? I think, do we need to add social media communication there, since that's what this is sort of all about, instead of just any volunteer communication? That, what fits in that category of effectively, their ability to effectively perform their job.
Yeah, I think that's fair, Mrs. Voigt, because the title of that section is Employees' Use of Personal Communication Devices at Work to Access Social Media for Personal Use. So when it's referring to communication underneath there, it's referring to communication on personal use social media.
Yeah.
So if the committee wanted to add that in, you certainly could, because that's what it is referring to.
Because that's the thing that would be potentially the most enforced is this post that you made in your personal social media that they feel interferes with the ability to perform your job. you know, as I discussed this with someone, it was the scantily clad weightlifter, you know, in their part-time, you know, in their free time. You know, could that be considered an inappropriate post if they're a, you know, an elementary school teacher or whatever? So I think the personal social media is very important, that's what we're talking about, is what we're, you know.
So what are you recommending? Because, like, to me, the title of it clarifies it. Employees' use of personal communication devices at work to access social media for personal use. So it's got to be some type of electronic communication. But regardless, I guess, what's your suggestion?
So the concept of what communication? It'd be the personal social media communication. You know, this is what we're looking at that's going to be subject to, you know, disciplinary action. And it's one of the things that we in previous discussions on the other, when you look at the 25 other references, that's one that we sort of had gone round and round about, like what could you get in trouble for doing a personal post?
So, I mean, in terms of whether we add social media or not to the paragraph to clarify that we're talking social media communication as opposed to just any communication, I'm ambivalent. I mean, if there are people on a committee that have a strong opinion, I will say this. This is the second time it's been through. I mean, we're very close on a lot of this, and I actually think, to the point that Dr. Siebert made, we're better off if we think this is ready, and from my perspective, this is pretty close to ready. We're better off passing this in August so that it can be presented to the staff as they return, rather than dropping it in on them in the middle of after they've already started the school year. So I actually would like to try to get this ironed out tonight if we're able. Mr. Brooks?
Yeah, I would agree with that sentiment. I think the timing of it, being able to get this to our teachers as they're coming back, and so we're not surprising them mid-school year, would be good. And if we're, you know, outside of that initial kind of small wording tweak that we suggested, I look at this section that we're referring to with, when it comes to personal communication, I kind of agree that the heading, employees' use of personal communication devices at work to access social media for personal use, clarifies everything below that section as a reference point to what we're talking about. So, as Mr. Watt stated, I'm ambivalent of if we want to spell that out in this section, fine. I don't know if it's necessary, but I have no issue with doing that. But I agree that we should try to iron this out now before teachers are coming back.
Yeah, I guess I'm fine either way as well.
Dr. Siebert, do you have a strong feeling one way or the other as somebody who will, you know, make the changes and then have your staff roll this out to people, whether that is an important delineation in this paragraph or not?
No, I mean, I think it's up to the committee, because I can see both sides of it, like most of you can, right? It is clarified in the title, and if we wanted to add it, we'd add it twice, once in the first sentence and once in the third sentence. You'd just add personal social media before communication twice, if I'm seeing that. Would you agree, Mrs. Voigt? You'd add it in the first sentence of that paragraph, and you'd add it in the third sentence right after volunteers.
Where would we add it in the first sentence?
So it'd be posting or engaging in personal social media communication. Right before the word communication in the first sentence, and then right before the word communication in the third sentence of that paragraph.
Oh, in the same paragraph?
Yep.
I'm sorry, I was looking at the paragraph above.
I think just because it had been district approved, you know, that's a very big switch that we're doing in that last section of this umbrella. You know, that's, you know, just like, again, a clarification. As I'm reading the wording of it, you know, this is a biggie. This is one that somebody could lose their job over. You know, and I just want to make sure that they realize what it's all about.
So I guess, Ms. White, since this is one that I don't know that we have clear direction on, do you want to offer that as an amendment to the policy? Because I'm not sure that I would or wouldn't support those changes or not. We might want to have some more discussion, but I'm kind of wondering if we want to actually put that forward as an amendment as opposed to just a friendly change. I'll defer to other members of the board, but, of the committee, but.
I think,
So what exactly would be the wording change for this section then?
Well, the heading would stay the same. It'd just be, as Dr. Siebert identified, like adding personal social media communication in those two places.
so,
What kind of communication are we
So-
talking about that could get you fired? It's your personal social media posts that could do it.
so basically before the word communication, personal social media, those three words before the word communication twice in that paragraph. That's the way I understand it. I think I'm fine with that.
Okay. All right, I'll spare the Roberts Rule of Order application then, and we'll just go ahead and adopt that as a friendly revision.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, any other concerns, comments, questions? Mr. Siebert, could you, or Dr. Siebert, could you perhaps recap for us the changes that we've agreed to here tonight so that
Yeah, let's
we make sure we're all on the same page?
let's try to
before we
do
vote?
that. So we are changing whenever it says social media platforms, we're going to say district-approved social media platforms in the beginning of the policy when we're referring to employee use of district resources and the district-approved social media accounts that I approve, that Mary Jo uses, that we use as a district. So those will all change from social media to district-approved social media. And then we will, in the last paragraph, under employees' use of personal communication devices at work to access social media for personal use, in front of communication in both the first sentence and the third sentence of the paragraph, we will add personal social media so it'll say personal social media communication in both of those instances. Julie, is there anything you think I missed? Or Mrs. Voigt, anything that you think I missed?
No, I agree with what you
Okay.
stated. I think just philosophically, I think we need to let, in the slide deck, as we share with people, one of our best salespeople, for the district and promoting the great things that are happening here are our teachers, our employees, our volunteers that are in the schools and see what's happening there. And I think we have to let the community know that we're not saying, no, don't say the good things.
Right.
That's not what this is all about. This is about doing it the right way. Doing it through the district-approved channels and, not getting into the negativity, being respectful, being courteous, having, a civil approach to what's going on. I think there's a lot of really positive things that are in this language, that I think we need to, this isn't trying to stifle social media, when we're sharing the positive stories about what's going on in the district.
It's absolutely
And I think
true.
that's a really important piece to rolling this out, that it doesn't look like, we're trying to, put the kibosh on social media, period.
Sure. Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, I just echoing that sentiment, I think that's an important thing to point out, and I appreciate the conversation that we've had here, because it kind of lends itself to that. This isn't, we're not trying to restrict anybody's right to free speech and access to social media. Social media can be an incredible tool for teachers and staff to use, but it can also be a double-edged sword sometimes, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And it's about maintaining that right to free speech and post online while still maintaining and laying out professional guidelines. And so, I agree, being able, even if it's something as, maybe it's a little silly, but like a social media do's and don'ts page on a slide deck at training, something along those lines. It doesn't have to be, but just to show how it can be used for positive purposes in a classroom versus some of the things that we're trying to avoid.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
All right, just a quick check. Everyone agrees that those are the appropriate revisions that we all agreed on? Okay. Any further discussion on 7544 social media? All right, I'd be looking for a motion for adoption as revised.
I'll move.
Moved by Mr. Borowski,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Brooks. Any further discussion? All right, if not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 4-0. Thanks, everyone, for working through that. I think we did some good work on this policy since it was first introduced back in June, so thanks, everyone.
And I might add, I thank you for pulling together all the references. I knew it was there in so many places. I didn't realize it was 25.
25,
You
yeah.
know?
Yep.
And, my question was like, if it's out there that many times, why do we have to do another policy? But like your idea of putting it together under one explanation, makes a lot of sense.
Sure. Well, and like I said, to intro, I mean, a lot of districts that had this policy, we just didn't. And so sometimes when we get updates, then policies we don't have are on the updates.
Yeah.
And you see some things in there that seem to make sense for whatever period of time, you're in. So we think it does put it under one roof, and we appreciate the committee's support.
All right, that takes us to our last policy action item for tonight, policy 7540, technology. Dr. Siebert.
All right, so this one, Mr. Schloman did a ton of work on this one, filling in, it's really outlining our equipment security and retention procedures, and some of the systems that we use, the serial numbering, the tracking software that we have, all of those pieces. And then it's ultimately adding the use or access of social media component to the end, and it's referencing the policy that the committee just approved. So you'll notice if this one passes as well, at the full board meeting, both of these would be on as actual agenda items, with social media coming first and then this one, because this one, even though it's a current policy, Julie caught this, we shouldn't put it in the consent agenda if you pass it, because if you pass that, but then social media, for example, would fail, then this policy is no good, right? So this basically is just how, I gave this to Steve, he marked it all up to say this is exactly how we identify our devices, this is how we use them, this is how we take requests for personal use, this is how we inventory and repair them, this is how we report losses. The technology department, we should highlight them more. They have this whole wing right here, and they are a well-oiled machine in terms of, right now, it's iPad refresh and kids coming in and parents constantly, but we do the roll of in student services of the different things. We'll have to find a way that we can do the role of the technology department too, because they do some pretty amazing work. And then, like I said, it ends with access to social media and some of the policies that also come around and coalesce around social media.
All right, thank you, Dr. Siebert. Yes, Mrs. White.
So I have a couple questions again, reading it. In identification on page 2 of the policy, in number 2, they have an acronym, the JAMF-MDM system. Is that defined in here somewhere to know what that actually means?
I don't know if there is an actual word for that. Or I've just always heard him call it JAMF. So I don't know if that's the name or if it does
Like an acronym
stand for something.
Yeah. I was just wondering, normally you spell it out the first time you use an acronym and then, use it after that, and I just not sure what it means.
From your technical background, Mr. Wad, does that mean anything to you?
Well, I couldn't tell you specifically what the acronym is in this case. I suspect it is probably one of the industry standard applications for inventory control of identification, inventory, control of devices. I'm not familiar with JMF specifically, but
It is I think it's just the name.
It looks like it's the brand.
It's the
is that
brand.
the brand?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's not an acronym, it's a brand name. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you. I didn't do a Google search to try to figure it out. I appreciate that.
No, it's good.
Then the next thing that just is under section B, use of district-owned devices, in the second paragraph below that heading, it references the idea that you don't want to get involved in the dark web, and like it's really good stuff. But specifically, use of devices to access material that poses a risk of introducing viruses, malware, or other destructive content is strictly prohibited. Users are responsible for replacing the devices that are inoperable due to the introduction of such malicious content while in the user's possession. So if you pick up a virus, yeah, I think of all the times that Mr. Schloman has been doing the phishing and and sending out these little things along the way, and if you get busted on like oops kind of situation, and it's not just a test, it's the real thing, you'd have to replace the computer system yourself if you make that again, not deliberately going out to the dark web, but just getting there through some of the malicious kinds of things that happen all the time through phishing and those kinds of scams.
So I'm going to make an assumption here that the cost is the replacement of the device that becomes disabled, right?
That would be my understanding, yes.
So I guess, and I think it was perhaps even a school district in Wisconsin in which somebody got caught in a spear phishing exercise. Someone was able to take over the entire system and were demanding ransom to release the system back. Pretty sure that was a school district, and I'm pretty sure it was in Wisconsin.
I think we talked about it at WASB.
Yep.
At the summer conference room.
Here's, and this is as somebody who works in technology, I don't think we can understate the importance of people being absolutely diligent in ensuring that they are keeping district resources and our data, particularly given that we're talking student data here, absolutely protected. And should someone, whether it was an innocent mistake or not, allow a virus or worse, some sort of hacker to access, I think the very least we can do is ask them to cover the cost of replacing a device that becomes disabled as a result of it. I cannot think of a scenario where that wouldn't be the minimum of what we would ask in that kind of a situation. Yes, it is easy to get caught in it, but the potential consequences of making that mistake can be catastrophic, not just to the district, but to our taxpayers.
This is another.
Yeah, so when I first went through my onboarding for becoming a board member, we had to do the training on how to identify phishing and different internet schemes. We teach our students digital citizenship, correct? Mm-hmm. Is there like a child version of that's included in there for like understanding like what websites are, could potentially cause? I'm trying to think of a way, little elementary school kids who just click on anything that looks fun to them.
Yes.
They might be more susceptible to this than older students. But I'm trying to think if that's incorporated in our digital citizenship training for our students to avoid.
It's a good question, Mr. Brooks. I'm not exactly sure what's all contained in that. One thing we could do, if this isn't like a critically important one, I could bring Mr. Schloman in to be able to kind of talk to a lot of these pieces and maybe help the committee feel better about some of those pieces if there's several questions. I'd be fine with that.
Mrs. Voigt.
Well, my concern is, again, like if we're rolling out the slide deck of what are the policies and what should you know about it, that should be like in bold. That this is important, that you don't get sucked into the, the kinds of scams that are out there, to try to get you to do it, because, you're going to, it's on you if and you're really going to potentially mess up the whole system, not just your own computer. That there has to be some, some teeth to the fact that we don't want you to be doing that,
So, that's probably important discussion. It doesn't really address, though, whether we're concerned about the wording of the policy.
No.
Do we?
I'm just more saying.
Okay.
This is, we're talking our slide deck.
Okay.
About, just be aware of this. Like I said, is there some way to put that in some special attention getting,
Sure.
because it's important.
Sure. I think the other thing to just remember as a committee is we already have this policy. So what's new to this policy is this entire green section on equipment retention and everything. So if you'd like to wait, we can bring him in. He can answer all of your questions on those topics. I'm not in a position necessarily to do him justice. And you could rest assured knowing that we already have a technology policy to start the year, and we could come back in September.
And the implementation of social media is in no way dependent upon whether we adopt this or not tonight.
No, it's not. Social media is already referenced in the technology policy. The new technology policy references 7544 in addition to the other policies it already referenced. So, no, we can still move forward with the social media policy and then get your questions answered and anything cleaned up in this one in the future without any trouble.
Mrs. White?
Just another one to look at related to it in the third paragraph from the end in that same section under section C rather. No business use shall be made of any borrowed devices. I think we want to realize that in some cases there are projects that kids are doing in class that are setting up a business. Like maybe in the foods class they're setting up a lunch experience or other kinds of things that no business. I know what they're saying is that this isn't to be to set up your own business on the side type of thing, but I think there are some examples where there are businesses being set up within classroom projects. And just a clarification that obviously for classroom use it's acceptable.
Oh, for sure.
This is their personal business outside of the class.
That's true.
Are we making a formal recommendation there, or is there a specific wording that you were looking for, Mrs. Boyd, or
It's just
just an educational piece
just
to
a
it?
point that hopefully that's.
So you're not recommending a change to the policy
No.
as written? Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
But just the notion of that, there's an exception to that, again, in
Okay,
the context
got
of
it.
curriculum, which they probably say someplace else that you can use it for class stuff. We just.
Oh, absolutely.
We don't want you to be
Right.
setting up
Yeah.
your business on
I
the
think that's
side.
understood.
Sure.
Are any committee members who feel strongly that we need to wait on this and have Mr. Schloman come in and speak to us, or are people comfortable with the policy as it's presented?
Do you?
So I guess, hearing no concerns about it.
Yeah, I think I'm okay with it as it is.
Then I guess I will ask if anyone has any other questions, and if not, seek a motion for adoption of 7540 technology.
I move adoption of policy 7540 relating to technology.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Mr. Borowski. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, passes 4-0. All right, that gets us through the action items specific to policy. Next up, Summer legislator visits.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Wad. We are transitioning here very quickly to the government relations portion of our meeting. So, as you know, we've been having summer legislator visits here in the district. We began on Monday, June 10th with Representative Adam Nalen. We followed that up with Representative Scott Allen on Wednesday, June 19th. We had Representative Cindy Dukow on Tuesday, June 25th. In between that, forgive me, we had Senator Rob Hutton on June 20th. And we actually have Senator Julian Bradley coming this Thursday, the 15th. He'll be here at noon this Thursday. Yes, if any of you would like to join us. We just got that established here recently. So I know that's a challenge during the middle of the day, so I fully understand. But really what we've been doing, and some of you have been able to join us on these, they're just good relationship building components, and whether we're connecting because we have a relationship, or we're refreshing because we used to work with them and now we do again with the new maps, or we're just beginning a relationship. They've been absolutely wonderful. And we basically do some introductions. We talk about what they know about the school district of Waukesha, what they'd like to learn more about, and then we share some pieces that we've put together over the years that kind of show our financial picture, our academic successes, some of the things we're really proud of in the school district of Waukesha. And then depending on what the relationship is, sometimes we get into some legislative topics too, some things that are current and some things we're grateful for, such as the low revenue ceiling relief that allowed us to get up to $11,000 last year, or other things that we'd like to see going into the future, right, with that whole concept of special ed funding, for example, like continuing that dialogue. So really good. Generally speaking, they last somewhere around 45 minutes to an hour, and I think we have nice dialogue, and ultimately the goal is, and we've developed it with a couple of them where, they're on the floor and they call and they say, what does this mean for you? And what does this mean for public schools? And what does it mean for Waukesha? And that's really what we want, right? We want to build those relationships so that we have connections and we can be resources and we can be supportive in any way that we can, because as Mr. Brooks well knows, legislators have to know a little about a lot of things, right? Like you got farmers coming in one day and you got road builders coming in the next and you got school district people the next, and how do you understand all of those things to the extent that you need to? So that's really, I think, our primary goal is to develop that relationship so we can be a resource for them, or they can get, honest feedback from us on what it truly means. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that we have been doing those. I think they're important. They're often great to do in the mid-year, right? When you're going into the second year of the biennium. So there's some value in that, and then we see where the elections go, and what changes and what stays the same, and no matter who it is, we try to develop a rapport and have a connection. So I certainly welcome any of you to share your perspectives on it, but I've appreciated you, when you can, being able to join us, and we'll continue to connect and have some fun.
Mrs. Voigt.
I was very impressed with the one I was able to attend, on the 10th of June. And I'm guessing that the others went equally as well. Mm-hmm. You have really presented a really amazing information sheet about the school district of Waukesha and what we offer, and just an awareness for our guests to be able to learn about who we are. And then, like, the compliments about the legislation, that recent efforts of things that have been good, and what you're recommending. I thought it was very well received, there in the one that I was able to attend.
Oh, thank you.
Right, yeah, I had the opportunity to attend a couple, and I would echo those sentiments. I think the information that you present to the legislators when they're here, I think really helps them learn a lot about what's going on here, and in particular what the positive things are that are going here, and then in the discussion, presenting what some of our challenges are that they may or may not be able to help us with. So very valuable. I've enjoyed them very much. I only missed one. I think that was with Representative Dukow, but thank you for sharing that Senator Bradley will be here. I definitely want to try to make it for that one if I can arrange it.
Yeah, no, I apologize for not sharing that earlier. We got it set up, I want to say maybe last week. I should have put it in your update.
Sure.
Just skipped it on that one. So yes, Thursday, August 15th at noon, he'll be here. And we had worked with Senator Bradley in the past. He had a small section of the district, then he didn't, and now Mr. Brooks, I think he has another small section. Or does he have a bigger section now?
So his district now includes all of city and village of Waukesha, if I'm correct.
Oh, so he's got a big
Yes.
chunk.
So
now.
yeah, he's essentially taking what used to be Senator Kappinga.
Oh, okay. Oh, thank
Oh,
you.
really? Okay.
It's at noon?
At noon. Mhm. And again, I understand the challenges. We were
Yeah.
working around his schedule. We thought it was going to be moving into the fall because his calendar was really tight, and then all of a sudden this noon slot popped up, and so we grabbed it. But I recognize that it's not easy for you as board members.
Well, thank you, Dr. Siebert. Any other comments or questions about the legislator visits, or? All right. Seeing none, we're at the section of other business, recommendations for future meetings. Mr. Brooks?
So while we were talking about social media and technology, it kind of got me thinking, and this doesn't have to be for next meeting, it can be just kind of generally off in the future, but, you know, been reading more and more articles about how artificial intelligence and the use of AI is impacting schools, specifically when it comes to things like cyberbullying and creating AI-generated images to, you know, go after teachers or students or what have you, and how different states have different policies, and there's some gray areas there. So, you know, we know that cyberbullying is, you know, already can be pretty vicious in our schools, you know, just kind of generally speaking. And I have a lot of concerns about how AI will feed into that and how it can be used for wrong purposes. So, doesn't necessarily have to be a pressing. It's kind of more of just if it was in line with what we've been discussing today, but something that I think in the future we should try to be a little bit more proactive on, because where other school districts around the country that have had issues on this, it was kind of one of those things where they didn't think about it until they were in a situation where now it's a crisis and we don't know how to handle it. And I'm sure there's part of this is, you know, part of the solution will be legislatively in the state level, and I know, oddly enough, Senator Bradley's chairing a informational or study committee over the summer on AI, so might be a good thing to ask him about as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. And yes, we definitely can do something on that. So just prior to you joining us, back in February, we passed an artificial intelligence policy. It was a Neola recommendation, and then it's not in depth by any stretch, but it gives it a little bit of an outline. And then artificial intelligence is also mentioned in our academic honesty policy, which obviously is another area that you referenced. But we can, that might be a great way for some of Mr. Schloman's staff to come in and kind of talk to us a little bit about what that means. And I'm trying to think, in February, did we have was it maybe Mr. Pat? Was he here talking about, when he was the West principal, talking about artificial intelligence? I just can't remember exactly who we had here. But we had some people here for that. But we can definitely do something on that. I think it'd be interesting because it's an evolving topic that we need to be ready for.
Mrs. White?
Just to concur, I think so often it is new technology, and your policy will say this and this and this are involved, and not necessarily say a direct reference to the AI-generated kind of approach to doing it. And, you know, like sometimes before you get the technology changes before the legislation does, and some things that are bad, there isn't a law against it, there isn't a policy against it, because it's too new a technology.
Yeah. No, thank you for the suggestion. We'll work that in within the next month or two, definitely.
Good idea.
Thanks, Dr. Siebert. Thanks, Mr. Brooks. Anything else? All right, I should have it jotted down, but I don't. Our next meeting will be in July. Do you know or September? Wow.
Go backwards. It's going to be a long year if you go backwards.
Okay, going back to
So this
July.
is in my mind. I'm trying to push
Nice.
back my youngest leaving for college. So I think that's what I'm subconsciously doing. I'm sorry, in September. Do you know the date? September 9th will be our next meeting.
9/9.
Following finance. With that, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.